All right, guys. So, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the history of selfishness. And, obviously, I don't have the time to go through every, character that played a role in history, but I'm going to touch on the ones that I think make my point when I say this quote here that selfishness is a desire for control over things that are beyond our control. And that basically means that, when we literally from birth, when we desire things that are beyond our basic needs like food, shelter, and that sort of thing, uh, that's selfishness. And one of the first things we learn when we're a little baby is that, we can get what we want if we, cry about it, or if we throw a tantrum about it, or, it's we learn early how to be selfish. And, and the whole key to life really is, and especially what I try to explain through Spiderbitevenom philosophy, is that it's our life's mission, our, how would you say, our quest to control that selfishness, or at least stay focused on what we can control, which is ourselves, and not try to control other people, control other situations, things that, basically anything that's beyond what we can control about ourselves, even if it means we're thinking, we can justify it and say we're doing it, for the greater good, or we're doing it to, protect others, and so on and so forth. Because the problem is that, well, first of all, we can't control other people. We can, force people to do things, through various means. But, eventually that backfires, and that has its own repercussions. And that's really what this lecture is all about. It's about how, throughout history, either most people were ignorant of this fact, or even if they knew of this fact to some degree, uh, they still felt like they were the exception. They were maybe the ones who saw a lot of unfairness, because most people are into their own thing, and that sometimes affects us negatively, and affects people around us and people who we love and care for. And sometimes we think that we're the only ones that can save the world. Especially if we see that there's nobody else standing up to do so. And what we fail to remember is that, again, we can't control that. And if we try, we're going to run into some really rough situations. And what what I like to call, or what I learned from a combination of Jedi / Stoic / Tao philosophy, which is this whole consequence of emotional suffering. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how some of these characters throughout history have either endured that on their own, or they, caused a lot of that amongst their fellow man. So, and one more point before I get to start is that the whole reason why I'm going over this is because what we're all really looking for, whether we know it or not, is a peace of mind. I'm trying to coin a phrase that says a peace of mind is the most powerful thing in the universe, and I really believe that. So, but anyways, I'll talk a little bit more about that after this lecture. So if you look at this first picture here, now this obviously is a picture out of from the Bible. Now whether you believe in the Bible or not, that's not the point here. But the story of Cain and Abel, depicted exactly what the situation was like before, mankind started to become civilized and organize themselves, and even civilization in of itself is kind of kind of ironic, because according to Tao philosophy, what's up is down, and what's black is white, and what's civilized is uncivilized, and so we're going to learn how really the system that we have in today, as a result of everything that's went on, is this system of mitigating selfishness and mitigating the emotional suffering that most people, most people have, and the violence and the chaos that's still there, ready to go off at any moment. So that's where it started. Is mankind obviously ignorant of the fact that in ancient times, ignorant of the fact that you gotta be compassionate towards each other and not be selfish. And anytime you become selfish, just for whatever reason, could lead you to kill your own brother. And because what happens is that you learn, or you don't learn, but you start to see that see your own brother or see your own fellow man as an obstacle to getting what you want, which is the whole problem with selfishness. So when Cain obviously killed Abel, he at that moment probably didn't think that he was doing anything wrong. He just probably felt like, look, I'm not getting the adulation or the praise from God like my brother is. I'm not getting credit for what I'm doing, and to me, I need to control that situation. I need to reverse that situation. I need to dominate my fellow man if I want to get what I want. And And when you try to dominate someone else out of selfishness, and it's not out of because there's anything can be done for good, but the same things that we do for good could also be done for bad. So when we dominate people, our fellow man, to try to stop them from controlling our lives, or what may seem like they're controlling our desires to get what we want, then that becomes a problem. So that's why man kills man and brother versus brother, and I mean that's why these things happen, because it's just out of selfishness. So later on, as society became more and more developed, out of this barbarism and anarchy that was just kind of running around, you had the Egyptians, and there were, obviously other civilizations that were becoming more organized as well, but not on the scale as the Egyptian Empire at that time. That was really the only known world of civilization, meaning that they came up with their own language, their own way of writing, engineering, all this type of stuff. And but as far as their principles of who had the right to rule, or who had the right to control things beyond what a normally person can control, which is themselves, they just chose the obvious, idea of well, maybe, because of birthright. And that's why, that's where you get the term birthright from, is this idea that, I'm a descendant of the first tribal leader or something like that. And therefore, my blood, I carry royal blood in my veins, and that gives me the right to rule. But again, you'll see this pattern repeated. Is again that very notion is just an act of selfishness. Now, that's not to say that not a lot of good comes out of it, because like the Tao philosophy says, what's good is bad and what's bad is good. So obviously, when, basically creation itself happens out of selfishness. So you want to create a society, an entire civilization, an empire, then that requires selfishness, because that has nothing to do with your basic needs of food, shelter, and that sort of thing. So after the pharaohs, it was still pretty, barbaric times, and then, but at the same time, people were starting to, debate, what was right, what was wrong, and then you had various religions come out of Egypt. Most of your religions today have some semblance or resemblance from the times of the pharaohs, and that's because they were trying to explain how the world works, and try to explain what they might not have understood, which was selfishness. They try to explain why people do the things that they do, and it was just easier to tell stories and through paintings or other forms of artwork, and then to be an example of what they were trying to portray as a god, as a pharaoh, and again a king and a ruler, and so that people had something to look up to and can justify their actions, and that took mankind obviously from a low level of barbarism to the next level of at least some consensus around, some kind of organizational consensus around the idea of God and something beyond themselves, and the idea of compassion and that sort of thing. But it was still very primitive ways of thinking. They still didn't fully understand a lot of things, and they would use a lot of different mythologies and different stories to kind of explain things. But some of those things turn out to be just as bad as the things that they were, trying to avoid. So that led to this next period of where you had the Babylonians, and the interesting thing about the Babylonians is that they the word Babel comes from Babylonians. I mean, it was just a society of people who all they did was just kind of philosophize, if you want to think about it, just kind of think of how the world works, and a lot of great ideas came out of it. When you look back at the Persians and the Babylonians, and how they came up with different ways of doing math and science and so forth, and it was a fruit of the all the babble and well, let's try this, or were you wrong, let's do it this way, and that sort of thing. And then as a result, they experimented with a lot of things, and a lot of things were successful, and so the rulers at that time, like Cyrus the Great, he again still following the principle of birthright and so forth, and right to rule or be the supreme ruler, felt like he could do so in a benevolent way, because he saw all the good that was coming out of all this babbling, and but at the same time, he felt like he was the only one that could distribute this knowledge and this the civilization fairly and evenly, and which means he had to be in control, and again, whether it was good or not, obviously it was good to a large degree. It's still rooted in selfishness, and that means there's always going to be somebody who's going to try to take over, and because they're selfish too. But some good things were happening, as far as the advancement of civilization. But again, that risk of the opposite happening, a lot of bad things happening, and of course emotional suffering happens at the same time that this advancements was taking place, and that created envy amongst other peoples who felt like, well, okay, you call yourself Cyrus the Great, well, I'm Joe Blow the Great, or who knows the Great, and so you had later on other rivals, and even when you're dead and gone, you've had people come after you, and they try to do it bigger and better. And again, all this is rooted out of selfishness. So that's why you see here Alexander the Great, because Alexander the Great, he really wanted to take over the empire and expand it the way he wanted to, and he thought he did, was doing it for the right reasons, and a lot of good did come out of what Alexander the Great did, because most of the known world at that time was definitely uncivilized. But again, the whole point of this lecture is to still get you to understand that it's still all rooted in selfishness. So the more he conquered, Alexander the Great, because he ended up conquering Egypt and the Persians, the Babylonians, and so forth. I mean, the more he conquered these territories and these peoples, the more responsibility he had, and the more envy he was creating amongst his rivals, and so it's one thing to build an empire, but it's another thing to keep it, and that just goes with everything in life, because again, that's the nature of selfishness. That's the nature of trying to control things that are beyond your control. It's just not sustainable, even if you're successful. Because at some point, no matter how great you are, no matter what great things you did, at some point you're going to grow old and die if you're not killed beforehand. So that brings us to, after Alexander the Great, to the Roman Empire. And the interesting thing about the Roman Empire is that, whereas you had the Babylonians before, where the common people were just kind of, the wise ones, and when they really didn't know any more than each other, but they still experimented and came up with a lot of stuff. The Roman Empire was a lot more advanced. They had great thinkers and philosophers who obviously studied the past, studied the history of everybody that came before them, and start to get closer and closer to the reasons why people do what they do, and how it's kind of rooted in selfishness, and that's where you got the Stoic philosophers really having their influence on what was now starting to become a more how would you say a more democratic style of government. And I'm going to explain to you later about why there's obviously downsides to democratic democratic governments, but just like anything else. But anyways, the Romans were experimenting with, or not experimenting, but they were listening to their advisors on how to rule and how to come up with ways to rule and protect themselves from people who became very envious and wanted to kill them and overthrow them. So you have philosophers like Seneca and some of these Stoics interesting thing about Seneca, and that's why I put this picture here, is at the time he was an advisor, a Stoic philosopher, and an advisor for Emperor Nero. And Nero, he relied on him heavily because he was a young guy who really didn't know too much about how to rule. But at the same time, he didn't trust Seneca. He became suspicious of him because this is what selfishness does. Selfishness, when you have power and you just focus on trying to control others and trying to control things around you, anybody who's close to that power, whether you give them that proximity or not, you're going to be suspicious of whether or not, this guy is going to get some crazy idea and try to take me out. So even though Emperor Nero and Seneca were very close, had a close relationship on a lot of different levels, he still was insecure about the relationship due to his selfishness, his constant need for more and more power, and maintain power, and maintain control over others. So basically, when you're at that point, you just forget all the good that anybody's done for you, and then you make foolish mistakes, or you do something that makes no sense. And so he forced Seneca to kill himself. He basically sentenced him to death. And then when Seneca had did that, Emperor Nero, he still at some level felt justified in that. He felt like he was, at least his rule was secure and safe. But at the same time, he still suffered emotionally, because in the back of his mind, he knew that, okay, yeah, I might take out somebody who maybe want to take over me at this time, but who's to say someone else is not going to go? And now that I got rid of my advisor, now who do I go to? So who do I trust? And that's the problem with selfishness. You lose trust in anybody, even the ones who you trusted in before. You just lose trust. No, you can't trust anybody when you're selfish. Nobody. And that's the problem with selfishness. And even though Rome, at this time though, it was starting to go downhill, but before him, the Roman Empire took basically civilization to the next level, and done things and created things and organized things in a way that's never been done, in the history of mankind. And even to this day, a lot of the principles that they've discovered and realized are used in modern day society. Even though that empire is long gone, over 1,000, 15, 2,000 years now. So, so that's the interesting thing about selfishness. Even when you're, you're doing a lot of good for society. You're advancing society. You're consulting with advisors, and they're helping you to see the nature of selfishness and the nature of man, and why things are the way they are. But when you're selfish, you don't really care about those things. You know that they're good things to know, but because selfishness is an emotion, if you feel one way, it knowledge doesn't necessarily change that emotion. It could, but you really, it takes you to redirect your focus onto what you can control and what you can't control. And that's the whole point of this lecture, is to explain why that's so. So if you move on in history, we're still kind of in the Roman period. You get to Constantine, Emperor Constantine. Now, an interesting thing about him was that, he really thought of himself as some emperor, god, king, or whatever, but at the same time, he realized that I need allies. I need, I don't want to constantly have to worry like my predecessors about, somebody, even my own advisors or my own people trying to kill me, take over. And so what he realized is that, religion could play a very key role in rallying the people behind you and your cause, and so he used Christianity basically to do that, and then that would at least keep the majority of your population, if not at least half of your population, somewhat on your side. And so he was the one that kind of made Christianity a state religion, so to speak, and so then the empire became the Holy Roman Empire, and then out of that he was kind of able to secure his empire. But at the same time, he was still acting out of selfishness, and he was still worried, if his plan would work, and so forth. And that created a whole new, level of corruption too, because, when you have an ally, you're supposedly both you and the ally are working together for some mutual cause, but the people who there's always going to be someone leading that party or whatever, or leading those allies out of selfishness. And so what happened after Constantine basically introduced Christianity as kind of a state religion, and he also allowed the same thing to happen over on the other side of his empire, which was Constantinople, and the Muslims at that time, they were kind of developing their own, organizing their own religion too. And so what he, figured was, okay, I can let this part of my empire be, use the Muslim religion as a state religion, and I can allow the Christianity on the western side of the empire be the western state religion. And it, on the surface it looks like it makes sense, but after he died, is when again, both these supposed state religions that are supposed to live in harmony and peace started fighting one another. And because again, it's the leaders, out of selfishness and power, are going to try to take each other out. And so that led to like this picture I have here of King Charlemagne, where he basically, he loved the idea of the Roman Empire and all its glory and its power and everything, and at the same time he considered himself a Christian, and he liked the whole idea of marrying the church and state. But he eventually learned a little lesson of his own that, hey, wait a minute, maybe, okay, the church is my ally, but at the same time, they look like they're trying to, take over all the power for themselves. And while he may or may not ever admit that, because again, he didn't want to show that he was against the Christian, because he considered himself a Christian, but he still saw a couple of moves that the church had made, so that the power structure seemed more lopsided. And so interesting story about him, and it's hard for me right now to remember all the details, but at that time, the way they married the church and state was, the Pope, which was introduced at this time, the Pope would be the one who would crown the king or the emperor, and that gave the king the right, or the divine right, to rule. And so when you look at it, it's kind of like, oh, well, wait a minute, is it the Pope giving the power or the right to rule, or is the state giving the papacy or the Pope or the church the power to even have such power? Again, it's selfishness. It's just, it just never ends. And so later, when it was time for I believe Charlemagne, or Charlemagne's son, his son, to be crowned, he was like, the son was like, look, I'm just gonna crown myself. And he just put the crown. He didn't even have the Pope put the crown on him, and have that whole ceremony like that. He just took the crown. He says, look, I just put it on myself. I give myself the right to rule, and I don't need the church to give me that right. So, and then, that whole period really exposed the corruption of the papacy, because now what you've created an institution out of what was just a group of worshipers who follow Christ and really didn't see themselves as some kind of organized religion. Because according to the story of the Bible and the story of Christ, he was kind of against that. He was against the whole idea of organized religion. He was definitely against the Pharisees, which was kind of the organized religion at that time. And but the Christians at that time, wanting to end the persecution that the Romans were constantly placed on them, and they want to be recognized as an official religion and so forth. They were kind of seduced into the whole idea of becoming married with church, between church and state. That whole idea. And so that institution in of itself is inherently corrupt. Because, again, everything is rooted in selfishness, because when you have an institution, no matter what it is, it's got to have a hierarchy, and that hierarchy has power, and that means you're ruling over folks, and you're trying to control things that are beyond your control. And so, someone is going to, so you may be the Pope today, but someone's going to want to be the Pope tomorrow. And they may not want to wait till tomorrow. They may want to do something to be the Pope today, and that's why that's really the explanation of history. Like, I can just tell you that, and without even remembering who these characters' names are and all that kind of detail, basically confirm everything that's happened throughout history. This is why I said in another section of my online teaching course that once you understand the basic principles of Spiderbitevenom philosophy, which is, everything is rooted in selfishness, then you have the power, this insight. You have the power to literally see the past, the present, and the future. You might not be able to predict the future in detail or with any sort of guarantee, but you have enough insight to kind of know where things are going in a general sense. You have the power and the insight to know how things were in the past. And you can, put things together and figure things out very easily because you just focus on that one principle of trying to control things that are beyond your control is selfishness. So obviously the Pope, at that time, the papacy itself, the institution of the papacy was very corrupt. And then on this, at the same time, I'll talk a little bit later, but at the same time, you had the Muslim religion, who were trying to organize themselves into an institution. They came up with this whole idea of the caliph and the caliphate, where supposedly some descendants of the followers of Muhammad, had the right to rule. So what they did was they kind of combined the whole birthright idea, which is inherently corrupt, and this idea that religion or theocracy justifies your right to rule, and so using that to create their own institutions of the Muslim religion, and at the same time, Christianity doing the same thing with Catholicism and the Roman Catholic Church. They both were just setting themselves up for just endless years of corruption and rivalry and selfishness, leading to a lot of emotional suffering, if not outright, killing each other and taking each other out and causing wars and all kinds of stuff, assassinations, and the crazy stuff that really just goes right back to Cain and Abel. That's why, again, this is the whole point of this lecture, is that really nothing's never really been solved, because there is no solution to selfishness other than focus on yourself and control yourself. But interesting thing about that, and I'll touch on that again later, is that without selfishness, you have no creation, you have no civilization, you have no empire, you have no advancement. So it's everything is a catch-22. Everything is, it's irony. Life is irony. What comes with the good is the bad, and what comes with the bad is the good. It's just, that's just the way things are. And that always has to be remembered, so you're never frustrated about why things are. You never ask yourself, well, why are things the way they are? There is no why. It's like Yoda told Luke Skywalker when he was training him. Luke Skywalker asked him the same question. Why is it? Why are things the way that they are? And Yoda quickly told him, says, no, there is no why. That's the universe. That's the way things are. There's a good and there's a bad. There's a coming and going. There's life and death. And it's just the way it is. Have no judgment over it, because as soon as you start judging things, then now you not only stifle progress, but you also have to endure emotional suffering, which is for what? You can control what you want to do, whether it's good or bad is just a point of view. Obviously whatever you do, there's going to be some good that comes out of it, even though it may be really, really bad. Because if you do something really, really bad, it's going to teach a valuable lesson for future generations. And, there's always going to be some kind of consequence that's going to be good. And the exact opposite, as far as benefit wise is concerned, from your own deeds, no matter how bad they are. And that's what history has taught us. Every one of these characters, that's why, go back to the story of Cain and Abel. After Cain killed his own brother, he was afraid for his own life, and God told him, no, don't worry about that. Because obviously there was a lesson being taught for future generations, that this is just the way things are. Now that you don't want to obey me, you think you're your own God, and you think you got things figured out, which just basically means you're selfish, and you think you can protect and provide for everyone's needs, then okay, prove it. Let's see you do it. And you're going to do a lot of good things, because out of good intentions there are some good in you. That's why it says good intentions. There's a little bit of good, even if you do horrible things. There's still some good in you. And unless you're totally evil, like the devil himself, or like in the movie Star Wars, Emperor Palpatine, he just done evil for evil's sake. You have some good in you. And even, in the Star Wars movie where Emperor Palpatine, he thought he was still doing good. Even the devil himself, the story in the Bible about the devil himself, even he thought he was doing good. because, that question of, well, why can't I just rule myself? Why do I need to answer to some God? How come I can't be God? And that's really the whole question of life is, do I have a right to rule myself, or do I need someone else to rule over me? That's the reason for life, is to answer that question, which you find out there really is no answer. Which is kind of interesting, I mean, there is, depending on, how you, what you believe in, but ultimately, there's no one else that can tell you that. It is just what it is what it is. And the sooner you understand that, sooner you realize that life just becomes a lot more easier, and then you get that peace of mind, which is what, my whole point of teaching Spiderbitevenom philosophy is, that peace of mind, which in my opinion is the greatest thing in the universe. There are so many things you can do once you have peace of mind that can benefit millions of people in future generations, if not now. And even at that, you'll have a peace of mind, because that's not the reason why you're doing it. You're just doing it because you're just focused on controlling yourself. And out of that, all this power will just come to you without even seeking for it or looking for it or having selfish desires for it. That's how the universe works. Because if you're not desiring that power, well, guess what? Someone's going to give it to you. But if you desire that power and you somehow able to obtain that power to some degree, guess what? Someone's going to take it from you. So, in my point of view, it's better to have someone give it to me, because that way that proves that I'm not hurting anybody. I'm showing compassion. Someone trusts me to have with that kind of power. Whereas no one's going to trust me if I'm out trying to seize that power, if I'm trying to take it, even if I feel justified for it. So anyways, to kind of move on here. So the papacy, the institution of the papacy was corrupt because of selfishness. The institution of the caliphate, inherently corrupt. All these institutions, but at the same time, mankind was steadily learning something. They were learning. It doesn't matter what kind of government you have. It doesn't matter if you're, married church and state. You still got problems. And so that brings us to this picture here, where now that you're done married church and state, you're starting to exercise power, because now you think, now I have the power to send men into battle, and because if I'm the Pope and I'm over the Catholic Church and which is the ultimate religion in the world, and and because it's married with the Roman Empire, and yet my rival, my competition, is the Muslim religion, which has their own figurehead, the Caliph, and he thinks just as much as I do, and we're both under the Roman Empire. We're both married to the Roman. It's kind of like polygamy, It's kind of like, we're both married to the same man, you know, and that's the problem with polygamy. There's jealousy between the wives. It's like, okay, you know, who has the right to say that my religion is the right one? You know, interesting thing about the Jews is that both the Catholic Church or Christianity or Catholicism or Christendom, or however you want to call it, let's just call it Christendom. Both Christendom and Muslim religion both felt like they came out of some form of Judaism. So they didn't have no problem with Judaism, so to speak. But because they both felt like they were the new and improved religion from God, you know, they got to take each other out, and ultimately, you know, they use that to justify what they were doing, you know, which is the Crusades. And that's why I put this picture up, because, you know, you had the Pope saying, oh, let's just do a crusade and take out our competition. And but that's really what it was about. It was just out of selfishness. They just used, you know, the whole idea of Christ and the Bible and so forth to justify it. But really, it was about power. You know, who had the right to rule. You know, I don't want two state religions. I want just one. And one world religion, you know, ultimately. And that's that's the nature, that's the history of selfishness. It never satiates itself. You always want more. And then even when you get it all, even when you have everything that you want, it's still not enough, because what's the ultimate thing that everybody wants, especially the ones in power? It's to cheat death. Yeah. They think that once I get all this power, I'll be happy. But no, you're still going to die. So that's why, you know, you have, and I'll just briefly touch on this. That's why later on you have, you know, these people nowadays that think that they can use science to cheat death. And because now if you get science to teach you how to teach death, and you know, like in the movie Star Wars, where you know, it seemed like you know, when Palpatine, before he became Emperor, told Anakin, you know, the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise. He was like, look, you know, kind of introduce some kind of science in there. He's like, look, he was able to manipulate the midichlorians to create life and to cheat death. And so that's really the ultimate power that people want, who, you know, say, well, I'll be happy once I'm in control of everything. No. It doesn't stop there. You still are going to want to figure out a way to live forever. And thank goodness none of us can live forever like that, because if that was possible, then because of our own selfishness, our own inherent selfish desires, we would destroy ourselves. If we live long enough, we would actually get that ultimate power, and it would be self-destructive. We would literally kill ourselves, because it would just be endless people who live long enough to figure out how to seize that amount of power, and in the process kill every last one of us on this planet. And really, despite the fact that, you know, we all grow old and die, really we're still at that point now where enough time has passed throughout history where we can literally destroy ourselves through, you know, thermonuclear war. And that's why, thank goodness that science did kind of come in a role and kind of confirm Tao philosophy, where, okay, now if you have this, you're going to give up that. So with these new scientific discoveries on how to literally destroy the planet, at the same time, all the lessons were learned about philosophy and how the nature of man and how to mitigate that through new forms of government. Because at this point, we tried everything. And to this day, we're still doing some of this stuff. But now we're putting in key mechanisms in government to kind of protect ourselves from each other, because most of us are literally retarded because of the selfishness we all have, and there's some people, they call them minority. There's a minority of people who are so selfish and only think about themselves so much, to a degree that they don't care if they destroy the world. They literally see themselves as, look, if I can't get everything that I want and rule the world, then I'm taking the world down with me. So the world be damned if I don't get what I want. And so that's why, I put these last 4 pictures up to kind of show you the kind of governments. There's obviously other representatives but they're all boiled down to these 4 different types, where they're just there to kind of explain at what lengths we've come to try to protect ourselves from literally a group of extremists, a group of dummies that think that they need to take over the world and recreate it in their image. So let's start with this one here. I mean, with the monarchy, the British crown. It's interesting how in Europe, they all have, these democratic institutions, which are these mechanisms that we're talking about to protect each other from the dummies. Ultimately, it was to protect them, and that's why in Europe you still have monarchies, even though they say, well, they really don't have any power, and they're right about that, because what they've had to learn, if you want to mitigate this possibility of self-destructive behavior, you're going to have to compromise. And so, again, going back to Tao philosophy, that's why I made it part of Spiderbitevenom philosophy, is that what goes up goes down, and if you have power, you really don't have power. You're going to have to, have the display of power, but then but in reality share that power. And that's why really they realize that there's a rule of 2, which goes to Jedi philosophy, Star Wars, where the Sith realized that they had to rule co-equally. You had Vader and you had Emperor Palpatine. He was Lord Vader and he was Emperor Palpatine. He's a master and an apprentice, but they ruled together. And that was the reason why, was because they don't trust each other, but at the same time, they can't live without each other. Because, if, let's just say, for sake of argument, let's just say Vader overthrew the Emperor, and the Emperor, let's say he didn't kill him, but let's just say he captured him. Okay, well now, he can put the Emperor on trial and put him in jail, and in front of the Senate and all that, and have him impeached and maybe even sentence him to death and all. So the Emperor would be at Lord Vader's mercy if he allowed Vader to take over. And he knew that, which is why, he was always scared of, and that's the problem with the Sith, is that they always, their rule of two is they always worry about their co-ruler finding an apprentice to team up and overthrow the master. Same thing with Vader. Vader was just as scared of Emperor Palpatine. If Palpatine wanted, for some reason, to arrest him, or put him in jail, or kill him, he could do it, because obviously Vader was guilty of a lot of crimes and so forth, and that's how monarchies ruled. After this time period of Charlemagne, and then later the Crusades, and the Caliphate, they realized that, look, we got to compromise. We got to build alliances. Lesson from Constantine. But at the same time, we got to be ready to betray our allies at any moment, because our allies are thinking the same thing we are. That at any time we can take them out. So, and because we're just all about power. It's nothing personal. It's about power. And so while the British Crown, when I say the British Crown, the British Empire, just representing all the other empires of that time of Europe, they had a compromise. They had to share power with the so-called democratic institution like Parliament and their judicial system and so forth. They had kind of separate that kind of stuff and allow the church to do their own thing and not necessarily have the power like they did before, where they were kind of running the show. So they learn a lot of lessons, in a lot of horrific ways. Some of these kings back in the medieval period, was constantly being assassinated, chopped up, heads cut off, all kinds of crazy stuff. Because again, this whole idea of power is rooted out of selfishness. You're trying to desire the power to control things that are beyond your control, and that's the problem. So the monarchies of today have no real power to do anything, but at the same time, they manage to protect themselves by sharing that power with the so-called subjects, and through so-called democratic institutions. like Parliament. But every now and then, you'll see this where co-rulers, just like the Sith Lords, they'll have situations where they start fighting each other, and that's because it's like a wild beast. They can't remember all the time that hey, we're sharing power. We can't just take each other out like that. So you'll see every now and then protests and riots against, let's get rid of the monarchy. Or sometimes you'll see some decision made in Parliament, and it's not really what the monarchy wants because they got their own agenda, and then they'll come out with some secret clause saying, oh no, well, in case of this dispute, the monarchy has this final say. I mean, there's a situation, I can't remember the details now, but that happened with I believe Tony Blair over some island that was being used for a military base, and something about the jurisdiction. The United States wanted to use it, and the jurisdiction wasn't clear on whether or not they could use it, and Parliament couldn't decide on whether or not it could be used, or the decision was really, the United States really didn't like, or the people running, the government at that time, something like that, where they just said, well, let's just go ask the Queen, because there's some fine print there in their constitution or whatever they use over there to rule themselves, says that ultimately in these situations, the monarchy still has the last say so. Maybe not in 99% of everything that's decided over there, but in special circumstances, which just another way of saying, and whatever matters, because most of this stuff that they decide upon in Parliament doesn't mean anything anyway. It has no consequence to the monarchy themselves. They don't care whether or not they live or die or starve to death or whatever. That's as long as they stay in power, they're cool. These certain situations, I guess they still reserve the right to have the last say so. But the point is that they, this sharing of power was necessary and was a lesson learned from history on why the British monarchies and the European monarchies had to share power. They realized throughout history that if they didn't do that, they were at risk of going out like their predecessors, with their heads chopped off and corpse, their bodies thrown in rivers and, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, so that brings us to this other form of mitigation, this other form of government, which is, this whole idea of socialism and communism. Mao was probably the biggest figurehead for that. This picture here, I chose this picture because, you look at him and you think, oh, he's seemed like a nice, humble guy, but the things that he's done, what he's responsible for, is the number of deaths and everything. It's just unbelievable. And it's because he's a perfect example of how, even if he had all the good intentions of the world, still his selfish desires to maintain power at any cost the lives of millions and millions of people. And that's what socialism does. It doesn't necessarily like to share power by creating the illusion that you have the power. I mean, it does so in a way, but what it really makes clear is that, look, if you don't allow me to pick and choose who are the ones that are in need, because you're not my ally, then I'm going to force you to at the tip of a gun, tip of a spear, tip of, it's by force. They make no illusions about it that we're an authoritarian government, and there is no power sharing in the sense of, making it, less obvious over in the Western world. We're telling you that this is the way things are, and we're doing it for the greater good. We're doing it to protect you. So either you fall in line, or we're gonna, terminate you. Just sentence you to death and be done with it. So that's their form. That was their answer. That is the socialist / communist answer to mitigating selfishness. Is an all central authority that has the power to kill you if they need to, for the greater good, and according to their point of view. And really, at the end of the day, it's just so that they can maintain power. Now, what do they give up? What do they have to share? Well, they have to share that power amongst people who say they believe in that. That's why it's called a one-party rule. If they believe, you say, look, I believe in this type of socialism. I believe in this government. I don't want to cause any problems or any protest or anything like that against this government. Then the party bosses have no choice but to share power with you. And as a result, you become more and more invested in that power. So you start defending a brutal authoritarian government because you invested in it. You're now sharing. You're just as much as in control of the situation as they are, and they realize that that's the way things have to be, because otherwise, they would be like no different than the monarchy. The monarchies of the past, where they try to rule by decree and didn't care whether or not you were you agree with them or not. They would just kill you, and ultimately they would get what's called a rebellion. So how do you get rid of so their answer to a rebellion under Mao and the whole communist type system was, look, just join the party. We don't want to kill you. Yeah, we kill people all the time, but if you want to avoid that, just join the party. And it works. To this day, I mean, China has, as far as their economic system, might be more capitalist and that sort of thing, but their government is still authoritative and still socialist and still communist. So, and it's one party rule. And it's developed to the point where there's really no turning back from that, because it works. China now has an economy bigger than any other countries in the world. So, it works. Whether it's good or bad is another question. Obviously, it's a lot of horrific things that still happen in China, but they have policies that very restricted on your personal freedoms, and whether or not you can have more than one child and stuff like that. I mean, They control every aspect of your life, but that's because they have to. And the reason why they get away with it is because everyone is invested in it. Everyone believes in it. Well, I should say everyone benefits from it. So if you benefit from it, why would you get rid of it? Even if it is taking away some of my rights, even if it is taking away some of the things I really want to do, I still benefit to some degree. If not, I won't get killed if I if I join these guys. So that's how the communist system works. That's their answer to selfishness. Then you have the caliphate. Again, this theocracy. Which is in the Muslim world. They're still holding on to the idea that you can rule by divine right, and to some degree birthright, but not so much birthright, because even the Muslim world has figured out that that's stupid. That was a dumb idea. So now they just justify their rule by saying, look, I'm some descendant of the followers of Muhammad, and I'm the caliph, and this is why in the Muslim world they're all divided. Even though all these countries profess to be Muslim, they still rival each other. Like you have Iran versus Iraq, you have Iraq versus Saudi Arabia, you have all these countries are divided that way because their leaders feel like that they have divine, like they all have to, and that's rooted in selfishness. It's inherently corrupt, selfishness. The moment you institutionalize, that's what you're doing, is institutionalizing selfishness. The moment you institutionalize some kind of hierarchy where somebody has to rule, it doesn't matter what the reason you use to justify it, whether it's divine right or birthright or or the right of the people, or whatever. You still are gonna have to deal with the consequences. And so in the Muslim world, because you have the divine right to rule and you have the divine right to exercise authority, then if I need to get rid of you, I just say what you're doing is against God, and but again, the problem with that is it keeps those countries from developing beyond a certain level of being civilized, beyond in many ways it's still barbaric, especially in the way that they think and how they should solve problems, so because if you don't if you commit a crime, or if you disagree with the state or something, you can have your hand chopped off, or you can have your head chopped off, or you can just be outright killed. That's the way a theocracy runs. It's basically no different than the communists, other than the fact that the communist doesn't necessarily say, well, I'm doing this because God says so, but that's how the Muslims do it. They just say, look, everybody's got the same religion. Every other religion is outlawed. And the state is definitely married with the church, or in their situation with religion. And if you don't like it, will kill you. So that's how they protect themselves from any minority of dummies who think that they are so selfish, or who think that they, can take over. That's how they deal with it. And once you adopt that religion that's in in these countries, then you're invested. You go along with their divine right to rule. And that's how they maintain control over everybody else. And you can't change that, because this has been going on for too long now. So you would have to literally have a lifespan as long as it took for this whole idea of the caliphate to come about and be institutionalized. So it's impossible for anyone, any leader or somebody, to come out of the woodworks and just overturn this idea, through dialogue and, peaceful means. Any of these governments that I'm talking about here right now, the only way you can take them out is through force, which is not possible at this time, because it's the thermonuclear weapons make that literally impossible, because it's self-destructive. We would all end up killing ourselves in the end. So that brings us to the last one, which is constitutional form of government. And I'm not here to say which one is better and all that. Other than, the principle of a constitutional government is the fact that it has more compromise as far as power sharing than the other three. But when you share power like that under a democratic constitution, now you are stuck with all the problems that the other forms of government have basically resolved, which is this constant threat of a tiny group of dummies, basically people who are so dumbed down and retarded and think that they have the right to change everything, change tradition, change everything, that they are a threat, and you can't do anything about it, because according to that piece of paper, that constitution, it says you have to protect those people. That's why you have, the Bill of Rights, which is, freedom of speech and, freedom of the press, and, freedom to bear arms and stuff like that. I mean, you have in the Constitution all of these protections for the dummies. And that was the great compromise, the great power sharing that's in the Constitution. And it all sounds good for a while, and it works very well. I mean, even today, we do it all. But now we're starting to see that break down, like right now as we speak, as I record this video, we're going through this pandemic, this corona nonsense. But it's just proof that a small minority of dummies who think they're smart enough to take advantage of a crisis or a pandemic or anything to take over the world, is a real threat. And there's nothing you can really do about it, because in order for this government to work, a constitutional government to work, they have to make that compromise. They have to share that power with these idiots. And that's why you can't, at the end of the day, hopefully we'll never have to, reach that point where we're going to use thermonuclear weapons against each other. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that was to happen. At the end of the day, you couldn't say that a constitutional government like the United States, for example, would be blameless and all that, because something like that would probably start here in the United States. Think about it. United States, this was the first country to use nuclear weapons in the first place. Something that's unthinkable. And that's because, again, a small minority of idiots thought it was a good idea to do so, to show off how powerful they were. And you can argue all day long whether, President Truman was right, because he supposedly ended the war by doing it. You can make the argument all you want. At the end of the day, it just shows you how dangerous selfishness can be in a constitutional republic. But to not, necessarily, knock down or be so hard on a constitutional republic, because in a lot of ways it's just as good, with all the benefits. I have to mention and include what those benefits are. The fact that you do have a lot more freedom. Now, it's ironic how, again, those dummies that I were mentioning are trying to take advantage of this pandemic to restrict those freedoms. But normally you have freedom, which is kind of a protection in of itself from the dummies. As long as you don't give them, let them rise to power too much, as long as you always recognize who they are and where they're coming from, and as long as you maintain the checks and balances that the Constitution has in the government, then you're relatively safe from these dummies, because that's why they made the Constitution. The Constitution is all about, protecting yourself from both this idea of a monarchy, to protect ourselves supposedly from this idea of this communism and socialism nonsense, where you got some idiot running around in the jumpsuit saying, I'm the dear father, and I'll take care of you. Kind of protects you from that nonsense. And it also protects you from this whole idea that, someone declares himself the caliph and has a divine right to rule. It kind of solves all of that. But at the same time, like going back to Tao philosophy, what goes up goes down. What's coming is going. At the same time, you still have to deal with the threats that those other forms of government have decided they don't want to have to deal with. They'll just take you out, terminate you, get you out of there. And but what we have to remember, if you're liking all the things that I'm teaching in this online course and these lectures and whatnot, is the fact that the more we stay focused on what we can control, which is ourselves, and the more we understand that we can't control things that are beyond our control, but when we try to, this is what we get, all this corruption and suffering and chaos, then we'll have that peace of mind, and we won't have the desires to control things that are beyond our control. Maybe before listening to this lecture, you might have thought, oh, yeah, I'm going to learn some philosophy and then become a wise man and learn how to rule the world. Well, after this, you may decide that maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe I don't want to step foot in that mess. But the point is to have emotional responsibility. Because if you have, peace of mind. Because if you have peace of mind, like I said, I firmly believe this. You'll have more power than some of the most powerful things in the universe, because a lot of power will be given to you over time, and in so many different ways you can't even imagine. You're going to have that kind of power, and a lot of it's going to come to just the insight of being able to avoid a lot of emotional suffering and be able to make good decisions and know what to do at any given moment. You're going to have that power. And that's the whole point of these lectures, is to not teach you how to get that power, because that would be like the Sith, who just want knowledge to get more power. But it would be like, the Jedi, where you just use that knowledge to defend yourself. Because let's face it, everybody's selfish, which makes everybody an idiot. And even more so, creates a group of dummies, a tiny group of dummies who think that they're smart enough to rule the world. It helps you defend yourself against these dummies who are literally retarded and could care less about what your needs are if they can get what they want, which is ultimate power and control, and ultimately to cheat death. They will do anything. Especially if they think they're so-called scientifically inclined, they will. If they think they need to experiment on you with vaccines and all kinds of crazy stuff, they'll do it. Because that's what ultimately they want. They want to live forever and run the world forever. And they don't like sharing power. They're forced to, because, that's what it's come down through, thanks to the lessons of history. But they don't like it. That's, that selfish desire in them prohibits them from liking what they're forced to do at this time, which is to share power. And while they may never admit it, or why they may never even acknowledge it, because they might be ignorant of what they really are doing, subconsciously, this is what's going on. They want to run your lives. They want to control things that are beyond their control, which is because you're a threat to their power. Sharing power is a threat to ultimate power. It's not the same. So they have to figure out a way to get rid of you. Because while they are the true dummies and the true idiots and the ones that are completely and totally retarded, they see you as the dumb one. They see you as a piece of garbage. You're not doing anything. Let's say you study Stoic philosophy and Jedi philosophy and Taoism, and you realize, hey, I'm just gonna, I'm not saying you have to just be a monk and go off in the mountains somewhere and live by yourself and not bother anybody. But let's say you were to do that, which is nothing wrong with that. Let's say you were to do that. Even that is a threat to these people, because they're like, I got to take care of you. I got to figure out a way for you to, get food and water and shelter and all this stuff. And I don't want to have to deal with that. Whether you are interested in those things or not, I don't have time for that. You're in my way. And if you can't help me, if you're not on my side, then you're against me, because I know at some point you may decide, oh, I don't want to be a monk anymore, and I want to come out of the wilderness, and I think now I have enough wisdom to run the world myself, and I don't want that. And if I'm in control right now, if I'm in power right now, I don't want that to happen. I will do whatever it takes to avoid that. So even if you're a monk, out there, this is why in Star Wars, if you look at that movie, they had the Sith had to hunt down all the Jedi, and when Vader and Emperor Palpatine, when the Sith found out that Luke Skywalker was not only alive, but he was learning to become a Jedi and all that, they moved heaven and earth to try to find him, and ultimately they realized that they had to figure out a way to just relax and allow some degree of Luke's own selfishness, which was his desire to see his father. Let that draw him and bring him out, so he can face the emperor. So that's how the world turns. It's through selfishness. It's how history is made. This is how people rule over each other. It's how power is shared. It's because of selfishness. Everything. Whether I'm the Pope, the Caliph, or whether I'm the King so and so and Prince so and so of that, or I'm some politician, in Congress. If I'm anywhere near power, my nature is to be selfish and desire more power, because it's got nothing to do with staying focused on my basic needs, which is just food, shelter, and water. I don't need power to over others to get those things. I can do that for myself. When you're born, literally from the day that you're born, and you're old enough to be independent from your parents and find your own food and water, you're an adult. Maybe not legally, but what's legal? That's just form of government. But you were born already with everything that you need to do. You were born with parents who were supposed to take care of you until you're able to do it yourself. And then once you're able to do it yourself, you have the power to just stay focused on your basic needs. You don't need any more power than that. But at the same time, we have the desire for those things, which is what makes us different from animals. Because that's all animals care about, is just their basic needs, survival. We, on the other hand, we have desires that go beyond that, because we have legitimate things to care about that are beyond our survival. We have our parents to care about. And if we're parents, we have our children to care about. And, we have our fellow man, which is why we focus on compassion. We don't focus on selfishness. But if we mix the two, if we think we're being compassionate when really we're just being selfish, then we're going to find out the hard way that we're no different than these idiots who are just trying to seek more power. And with that comes the ultimate consequence of just emotional suffering, where you can't, you can't live with yourself, or you feel like you can't live without, someone who's significant in your life, or you feel like you can't live without your job, or you can't live without your, some fancy car you bought, or you can't live without some girl you met, or, whatever. Attachment leads to suffering. And and it all comes out of this desire for more power. And that desire for more power just comes out of this whole desire for things that are beyond our control. Which is to control things that are beyond our control, and acquire things that are beyond our basic needs. That's where it all comes from. So anyways, that kind of wraps this lecture up. I know this is kind of a long one, but and there's so much more I could talk about here, but I just thought I would touch on these different points in history, and show you why they are the way they are, and how they all rooted in selfishness. And then hopefully this will help you understand the world a little bit better, and be closer to having that peace of mind, which again is the most powerful thing in the universe. So with that, that'll be the end of this lecture, and we'll move on to the next video.